Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our special speaker series on the evolution of organizational leadership with our guest speaker, Megan Robinson. And it will be moderated by the founder and CEO of Converge, Mark Izzo. Everyone's is an attendee, so your mics and cameras are off. If you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to put them in the chat. And I will be monitoring that and can jump in and interrupt Mark and Megan as needed. So I will turn it over to you, Mark.
All right, Anna, thank you so much. Megan, thanks for being here. And thank you for all our attendees. I look forward to an interesting discussion. We at Converge, as Anna indicated, my name is Mark Izzo. I'm the founder and CEO of Converge. We're an HR consulting, outsourcing, recruitment firm located in outside of Philadelphia. And one of the things that we see on this topic consistently is organizations struggling, frankly, with the evolution of leadership, with managers, with great contributors being promoted and then struggling in their new role. And so Megan is going to help us make sense of all this. And hopefully you'll have some questions. And as Anna indicated, please put them in the chat if you would. Megan Robinson is the founder of at eLeader Experience and works with individuals and teams to develop self-leadership skills that grow companies. She started her career in marketing, climbing her way through the corporate ladder at advertising agencies, in Fortune 500 companies. Like many, she caught the entrepreneurial bug and started her own marketing company. After yet another quote-unquote business therapy session, Megan discovered that her true passion was in coaching, and is a John Maxwell certified coach and a DISC trainer. In addition, she's past president of ATD Chai, which is the leading learning and development organization in Chicagoland. Inspired by her own success, her own successful career in corporate and entrepreneurial environments, Megan makes leadership approachable to everyone, regardless of title, position, or experience. And I can say, after doing some work together with Megan, she actually does live and breathe what I just described. So I think this will be an interesting and enlightening discussion. And I'm going to ask Megan to give us a quick opening on the topic of the evolution of leadership in organizations, and then I'm going to ask some questions and she's going to do all the heavy lifting.
I don't know about that, Mark. I have a feeling that you have a couple of insights on this topic as well. So
a little passionate about it, yes.
I mean, aren't we all passionate about leadership? I think everyone on this call is always curious and continuously wanting to learn and grow with the topic. But to kick off, that's a big big area to cover. I don't know if we can promise everything in the amount of time that we have, but we'll do our best to give you some insights and some ideas. But I love talking about this evolution of leadership, because leadership, management, all these skills look very different. It's a very personal experience. It affects an organization at every single level. And we all know it's so critical. We all want to develop these skills, but most people haven't put a lot of thought and intention in how we're going to get there. And particularly from that transition from individual contributor to manager to director to owner, company president, whatever your title is a complete evolution. And each step along the way is taking new experiences, new learnings, new practices, new tools, and it's often not done intentionally. We're haphazard with it. We promote those that we think are great at their job, and we hope they're great at the next level. We got a little Peter principle in there. We throw people in, see if they sink or swim. Sometimes we start our own companies and we have no idea what it means to be a leader, what kind of a leader we want to be. So I'm really excited for this conversation today, Mark, to talk about wherever you want to dive in.
Sure.
And how do we really develop that next generation of leaders? How do we upskill and improve the leaders that we have? And what does leadership look like next?
That's great. Thanks for that opening. And I want to jump right into what you just pointed out in terms of and we see this a lot with our clientele, and that is the individual contributor who gets promoted to manager. So what is it that you see? Because you're doing this hands-on, working with companies all the time with this particular challenge. And what are the challenges with when you take that individual contributor and make them a manager?
I feel everyone on this call at some point or another has been in that bucket, right? There was that point where you were great at what you did, you finally had your job figured out, and then they promoted you. Some of the skills that I really see challenges and what I've noticed, it's a long list, so cut me off or add to it at any point, Mark. I see that delegation is really, really hard. You're used to doing it yourself, giving it to someone else it feels impossible. You're good at it, so you want to hold on to it. And then having to delegate it is a completely new skill and framework for you to understand. I see a challenge in wanting to be people's friend, particularly if you've grown within an organization, those that you were in the trenches with, now you're supposed to manage and lead them. And that pendulum swings both ways. Some people really want to be their friends and maintain those strong bonds, and they get walked all over. Some people want to now be they're the boss, and so they compensate for that. And it's really a struggle of how to build those relationships effectively. What are some of the things you're noticing, Mark?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I was jotting down as you were speaking, not enough time is a big one, right? So I'm trying to still be the individual contributor. I'm trying to still be the friend of the employee that I used to work right next to. Now I'm supervising. I'm trying to be the supervisor, and I just can't get anything. There's nothing additional that can go into that bucket because it's overflowing.
I love thinking of time management because that's what people jump to. They're like, I don't have enough time to do everything. Right. And I'll actually push back, and it's not a matter of not having enough time. It's being intentional about where and how you spend your time. Because you do have to save some time, most likely, to still be that individual contributor. The pressure that we put on mid-level managers to still contribute and keep those responsibilities doesn't go away. And that's part of the squeeze and the pressure that they feel. So part of it is understanding what that balance is. But I'm going to say the other side is knowing what it looks like. We'll say preserving time for it, but being intentional on how you lead. How are you coaching and mentoring your team? How are you taking those times for one-on-one meetings? How are you running them effectively? So I always like to go through an exercise in one of my trainings where I'll look at time you're spending managing, time you're spending leading, and time you're spending doing. And I'll encourage everyone, even on the call or the recording, to just take a moment and really think about how much time are you spending in each bucket? Is that the right amount of time that you should be spending in those buckets? I can't answer that for you. There's no magic formula. Every role is different, but being intentional on where you are devoting the time and where you need to be. Some of those other skills like delegating will help transfer it, but
sure,
it really depends on the role and the expectations.
I really see, I think you made this point earlier, and I'd like you to just expand on it a touch, and then we'll sort of switch gears a little bit here. But the idea of, I used to work next to you, now I'm above you on the corporate hierarchy, right on the organizational chart, and how do I make that adjustment? Because we were friends, we used to eat lunch together, we hung out on the weekends, maybe even, who knows? And now I'm your boss. So how do you overcome that? I mean, that's such an emotional thing, right? It's not necessarily a skill taught and learned. It's simply who you were and now who you are, and how do you transition that?
That will look a little bit different for everyone. So I will say early in my career, I had one manager that gave me advice of, don't ever get too close to people you work with because one day you might have to manage them. You're smiling. I'm sure some people have been given that advice or they've taken it. But it also made me very guarded with my colleagues. I didn't want to get to know them on a personal level, or I always suck out relationships in a different department or different team, which was beneficial in some ways, but I think it held me back. in a lot of ways. So I will always encourage professional boundaries at any level, at any skill. And that looks a little bit different. It may mean only 2 drinks at the company holiday party. It could mean, making sure that you have a balance of friends at work and outside of work. And I've seen those boundaries get crossed in a lot of good and bad ways. Right? There's definitely the overcompensating, but I'll say to kind of help if you're over on that wanting to be friends with everyone, look at the expectations that you're setting. Just because you're in great relationships and you want to be friends with someone does not mean that you can't set great expectations and be very clear with what those are. That would be kind of my advice and focus on that. Most people don't have a hard time on the opposite end of it, but making that
Sure.
transition, I will say clarity is really, really what's the most kind with that. I have hired a couple of my friends before, which is always interesting. People always say never hire your friends. And I always like to say hire them with really strong understandings, with clear expectations. I had a good friend of mine, and I would literally say, okay, I'm going to put on the friend hat now, or like, hey, I'm taking work hat off. Can we talk about this? And I would do a physical movement those hats on what situation we were in, and really calling it out of, can we talk as friends or are we talking professionally? And helping set those boundaries or clarify. Gave us a fabulous working and friend relationship. I would hire her again in a second. It worked out really well. And there were times when we had some really tough work situations that we were navigating, but we're able to have that maturity and walk through it later.
So, we talked about the dilemmas associated and some of the problems associated with the individual contributor becoming a supervisor and so forth and so on. And so my question, I guess, would be as I sit back and think about, well, if we're all doing this and it's not working, well, first of all, why are we all doing it? Because we need leaders, right? We need managers and we need supervisors. But how do we do it better? Like, what's the right way to do it when you have a star who wants to be promoted and you have a position that needs to be filled in a supervisory rank? How do you best do this?
There's a lot of ways to do it. And there will be a couple key components that you really want to be intentional with. One is setting those expectations and getting some really good, clear reflection and buy-in from the person, right? What does it mean for them to get promoted into that role? What do you need them to do now? And how do they need to shift themselves? That's going to be in that internal reflection and asking some of those questions of, what does this role mean? What are you looking to achieve in it? Why do you want it? What's happening with that will help them really get into a different mindset that it takes as someone moves at any level in an organization. Understanding those differences between doing and leading. What does leadership mean for them? What do they want it to be? Do they have a leadership vision? All of those are a lot of deep personal reflection that it takes for someone to move into those different roles. And I'll say the other piece of that is a lot of the coaching and mentoring. I've seen it done well. I've seen it done not well. And a lot of times it's asking those great questions, giving them the support, the tools, the understanding, the resources in order to get into that, be successful in that next level. And I don't have the statistic in front of me, but I think it's about 75% of the time, someone will fail in that first manager role that they're promoted to. And it's not surprising that there's so much failure because they don't know what's expected. They've made a transition. No one's there guiding them. No one's there to answer questions. They don't have a strong relationship with anyone at work, and they get lost. And normally, I see a lot of organizations promote and train by osmosis, right? You sit with me, you sit in the meeting, you clearly know how to do it next time, which is great, and we all do it. But if there's not a reflection, if there's not a feedback, you don't know what they took away from that session. You don't know what they're going to do next time. You don't know what they learned. And that's where I see a lot of that gap. So it's a lot of that. You can still learn in the moment. You can still learn by doing, but without solid reflection and coaching and debriefing, that learning may not be what you intended or didn't even take place. The other, I'll say extreme ends of this are people that are very linear. They want to really read and research and understand. Oftentimes you need to put the right resources in front of someone so that they know where to go. They know what skills they need to work on. They know what's expected, and they can go out and do that research on their own. You can do training and coaching programs for them. You can do a lot of different opportunities for it. I personally, obviously I'm a little bit biased, but I do like to see a lot of development programs in place with organizations and teams, either one-off opportunities, finding an internal or an external coach, finding that mentor that they can really get the most out of, but putting together a thoughtful plan on how they're going to grow, what they need to grow in, and then being able to work that.
Yeah, it sounds like this requires, as you indicated before, it has to be intentional, it has to be well thought out. You have to, as an organization, make an investment and recognize you're going to do that. And an investment may be in money, it may be in time, it may be in people, who knows? It may be a combination of all those things, but it can't be done the way it's historically been done, because that's proven to not work, right?
I think it's pretty clearly proven to not work. And I'll see people push back like, well, that's what I did. That's what happened to me. And I survived, which doesn't always mean that they did it well. They most likely learned a lot of lessons, had to break a lot of bad habits. I look often at what my parents' experience was. And when they went through training programs, resources, it was very robust in what that corporate environment provided. As someone moved through the ranks, as someone had different opportunities, they gave them a robust program. And they created connections at these events and opportunities that are still lifelong friends today. And unfortunately, they have been cut and slashed and are no longer part of the corporate structure. So still having that intention ways. It doesn't have to be with, the 15-week manager training program where you go off site and you literally, are in hotels and training for that amount of time. You can integrate it into the process. And I honestly think that that is best, because you find what's applicable, because you have that reflection along the way, and you continue to learn and grow from each of those experiences, as long as you're intentional with that growth.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point. I have a nephew who's actually works for a large company, and he's in 18-month rotations, right? So when this kid is done after 3, 4, 5 years and actually placed in a management position, he will have really been well trained. And I guess the challenge gets more complicated when you talk about clients that we typically work with at Converge. At least they're small to mid-sized businesses, so they don't have the luxury of an 18-month rotating program, right? And the other point you make, which is well taken, is that, due to budget cuts, et cetera, a lot of those programs have gone by the wayside. So a little bigger challenge for the small, mid-sized businesses to be more intentional and thoughtful about how they do this.
I will say, if you can be intentional and thoughtful with it on what are the specific needs, where are the gaps, how are you going to support someone through this transition? Just even asking yourself that question will really make you quite a few steps ahead. And I find, honestly, that with a lot of employee engagement, with the retention issues that we're seeing, you don't want this person to fail at that role. And we all know it's going to be much more costly to replace them. But just making sure that you're finding the ways to be agile with it and give them the learning opportunities, because you can throw more money at someone, you can throw different benefits at them, but most of the time, particularly with the younger and the less experienced people on your team, they're hungry to learn. They're hungry for the career development more than just about any other benefit. And if they know that they're going to be supported through that, then they are much more likely to want to stay there. Then their success is that much more opportune. Then you have a real growth strategy.
Switching gears a little bit here, these terms are used interchangeable a lot, and I not sure where I stand on that. And so I'm going to ask you the question: manager and leader, right? We use them interchangeably. I don't think they are, but I find myself doing it just when I'm talking quickly and,
Mhm.
uh, so tell me a little bit, like, what's your opinion on that? I'm a manager versus I'm a leader, and we'll talk a little bit more. I have some other questions for you once we
Fire through
tackle
that.
that one. Yeah, let's tackle
Um,
that one first if we could.
well, I think it's interesting. Manager is definitely a title. Manager is a position within the organization. You're deemed a manager. Very rarely are you deemed a leader. And as I mentioned earlier, everyone at an organization can be a leader. Everyone has that self-leadership on how they're showing up, what they're doing, how they're taking their own accountability, responsibility, how they're contributing to the culture. That is all leadership. And that is not just reserved for the leadership team. So that's the first piece that I'm going to say. But typically, my definition between manager and leader, say manager is managing processes, right? Managing, you want to make sure that all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, the numbers, the KPIs, the metrics, everything is running smoothly. People are following the process. When it comes to leadership, leadership is about people. You can only lead people. You cannot manage people. You have to lead them. They're the relationships, the communication, the getting the buy-in, setting that vision, how they're leading and where they're going. That's going to be the leadership side. So people
And
versus process.
no, that's great. That's an answer that makes complete sense to me. My next follow-up question to that would be the skill sets for each. What are they? I mean, I know you can't go through an exhaustive list here. We don't have enough time, but nonetheless, give us a feeling for what a good manager is, what those skills are, and the same on the leadership side.
Well, when you start to think about the process and people, they may have very different skill sets, but I will caution everyone that you do need to have both. You need to be able to be a balance of both the leadership skills and the manager skills. If you are too focused on people and you are not following the process and making sure that that's happening, things are going to go haywire. If you are too focused on the process and dotting all those I's and crossing those T's and having everything in line, you are not worrying about the people, things are going to go haywire. And I think I'm hoping everyone can start thinking in their mind of someone that was gravitating towards one side or another and the frustrations that you have. So I'll say in the manager, it's very much in how do you keep things the same? Are you organized? Are you following up consistently? Are you dotting those I's? Are you specific? Are you meticulous with stuff? Are you clear on what the expectations are? Have you really formed that strong process that you can follow? On the leadership side, that's where you're going to have the finesse that comes in. That's where you're going to have the skills in delegation, perhaps. Maybe the management process is going to be what you're delegating and how, but the skill in doing it gracefully is going to come from the leadership side. It's when conflict arises, how do you navigate those situations? Again, to get to positive resolution, not just avoiding it, but how are you addressing it? How are you being collaborative in it? It's the how are you coaching your team for success? That's a huge skill. How are you having those constructive feedback conversations? How are you asking them questions? How are you making sure that they're able to grow and develop? And I'll even take goal setting as a good kind of linear between the two. Say leadership is setting that vision, making sure you know what the long term, kind of seeing something a little further out. Management is all about those SMART goals, right? You want to know what exactly specific, measurable, timely, right? You're hitting your SMART goals, but if you don't know what you're hitting your SMART goals towards, you're missing that vision piece. And so it's really important that you're balancing and not just having one side or another, but that you're able to integrate those two.
So there's a saying, right, that leaders are born, not made. And what are your thoughts? Sorry, I almost made you choke there. What are your thoughts on that? Are leaders made?
I think absolutely leaders are made. I see everyone feel, and it actually holds up a lot of people from stepping into leadership roles because they don't think that they're a natural leader, because they don't know what it looks like to be an introvert that is an incredible leader. And it really starts to hold them back. And I will always look for everyone to really identify what leadership looks like for them. And it is everything across the board, from introvert to extrovert, from bold to a little bit more cautious, but really making sure that you have a good structure in place to survive, to succeed with that. So I'll put it in the category of emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is something that we have the ability to flex, that we can pay more attention to, that we can build or strengthen. Same thing with leadership. Some people are a little bit more naturally adept to some of the skills and needs. Does not mean that you can't change that. Does not mean that you cannot adapt. It does not mean that you are not able to flex some of those and strengthen those muscles. I always look at that as meeting someone where they're at. We all have the ability to change our behavior. And so if you're able to change your behavior to be more leadership-like, or how you would interpret that, you have the ability to show up as a leader.
So in your practice, what do you see as leadership? And I'm speaking organizationally now, not individual. In organizations, what do you see as leadership gaps?
Ooh, there are quite a few leadership gaps. I'll say some of the big gaps are just having that individual contributor into manager. And that gap can honestly last quite a while. People can continue to get promotions. They can continue to have that individual contributor mindset until they really understand what it means to be in charge of a team. So there's a little bit of that gap that I'll notice. I'll see gaps even from the top down, where the leader at the most senior level kind of wants to be in control of everything, and they're really trying to micromanage everything or make all the decisions, and they haven't really found a way to trust their team. I've seen that as a pretty big gap on both sides of it. What are some of the gaps that you notice, Mark?
Yeah, I think what you just mentioned is clearly are there. We see them in our amongst our clients and people that we talk to in the industry. I think what you mentioned earlier is an interesting one, which is some managers don't believe that they have the wherewithal to fit that leadership role position. And then I think the other one that needs to be pointed out here, it's that, and you hit on it a little bit with the control issue that you mentioned, but leaders not really understanding their role and overstepping it, trying to over control or manipulate. And that sounds very cynical. I don't mean it to be, but just those types of things where they're not really leading, they're just, it's a manager in disguise, right? And over controlling and wanting it done their way as opposed to trusting, right? Big part of leadership is trust and bringing people along and all of that. So we see that as somewhat of a skill deficiency or gap that needs to be worked on. So yeah, I think that's all those things in tandem, I think, are some of the things we probably collectively see in organizations.
Yeah. And it's interesting to see where and how they show up. Because you'll see it, so oftentimes it'll boil down to how conflict is resolved or not resolved within an organization. That'll be a great teller of where there may be some leadership gaps or some opportunities for it. How people give feedback, which kind of tends to feed into that conflict. Or I'll say anytime there is a challenge, and it could be a challenge with supply chain, it could be a challenge with a new hire. Anytime you have that conflict or the ruffling those feathers, that tends to be where you start to see those leadership styles perk up, and that's where you see someone's leadership ability either rise and successfully adapt to that challenge and solve those problems, or not do so successfully. And success can look different for different people, right? I overcome a challenge, I saw a problem, I fixed it, but how did the people feel? How did the team respond to that? What kind of a culture are you creating for them?
Yeah, and a couple of other things I just thought of as you were talking there is leadership is around, or is about, I think core to it is about exhibiting the organizational values and culture and living that and demonstrating it for others, even when it's uncomfortable and it's, maybe not the popular decision, but it's following the North Star, and that's what a leader does, really understands the organizational values and so forth. And then the second point is, and I'd like your thoughts on this as well, Megan, in that, at least in my mind, part of a leader's role is also to recognize. I noticed in the, when we talked about your bio, that you have background in DISC, and you and I have talked at length about predictive index and other assessments and so forth. I think a really good leader recognizes the various makeup of the team and how to get maximum performance out of each of those people while making them feel valued and making them feel part of the team and making them feel that they're making a significant contribution, etc. They're not all the same, nor should they all be the same, right? You don't want all the same type of people in the organization. So I think a leader, really, to sum that up, two things. One is the values and the vision of the company and the mission of the culture of the company. And the second is recognizing the strengths and weaknesses amongst the team and optimizing that for performance. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm so excited about this. I want to address Jennifer. Don't worry, we'll get to your question in the chat. But values, yes, you have to live and breathe. And I'm going to say that's really leading yourself. Are you honing? Do you have a mission? Do you have strong values? Are you consistent with that? Do you do what you say you're going to do and how you're going to do it in a way that's reliable for other people and aligned for yourself? But what gets me kind of jazzed up is the second piece there, right? Because that's, I don't want to say a given. People really do need to be intentional with that, and people are doing the best that they can. But when it talks about the team, I look at it as meeting the team where they're at. And the more flexible you have in your style and your ability, the better leader you're going to be for them. And it's not a matter of having other people bend to you, and you're not bending for them, it's meeting them where they're at. That's where you're going to get the best out of it, whether it's understanding what they need from a motivational standpoint, being able to connect with them on the personal, professional standpoint, if it's giving them the resources and tools, whatever it is that meets them where they're at, and you're able to understand that perspective, that a little bit of empathy with it. But I'll even say just the basics of listening and asking great questions of your team to make sure that you have that understanding so you can meet them where they're at. Because if you don't do it, you've lost them. And that happens every single time. You cannot have the expectation for people to meet you. It is your responsibility as the leader to meet them.
It sounds like when we're talking leadership in particular, as we are now, that coaching would play a big part in companies making an investment in coaching and companies carving out the time to develop that talent. And do you find, or what do you find, I should ask, in terms of coaching leaders? Like, is it team coaching? Is it individual coaching? What seems to work better based on the work that you've done over the years?
Yeah, it always depends on the goals and the needs of the organization. So coaching tends to be a very personal experience on what are the obstacles, what are you facing, where are your blind spots, and making sure that you're able to overcome and continuously see improvement. So I love group coaching just because it brings people together from a similar level, similar experience, something that they have that kind of commonality so that they're able to connect and learn from each other while getting that reflection, while asking themselves really great questions. As things become more individualized and more specific, that's where typically one-on-one coaching, I will see, be a really great fit because you have specific goals, specific needs, specific challenges. Great, go at it one-on-one. But I also see the role as manager and leaders within the organizations to be able to coach their teams. If you're not bringing the outside perspective in, the outside is great because as an outside facilitator, I can ask the questions that HR will not allow you to answer. And I'm sure you can attest to that. Right? I can cross some of those boundaries. I can ask what's happening, which is always very fun. And I get a different perspective as people open up. Because you're more likely to open up with someone that is not your HR person or that is not your direct supervisor. There may be something holding you back with that. But there are a lot of microways, not microwaves, don't worry, that leaders and managers can really help coach their team, and is asking great questions. It's not jumping in and being that advice monster that you just tell them exactly what to do. It's helping them, guide them along the way, and getting them to have to stress those critical thinking muscles, which we all want our teams to be better critical thinkers, but it takes time and practice and patience in order for us to coach them into that. It's much better in the long run, but it does take time. It is a time investment. It is a practice. There are times when you don't have time for it, and there's times when you do. And making sure that you make that as part of your leadership style, and that is the best way to get the most from your team. Is it okay if we just address Jennifer's question?
Please,
She asked
go ahead. Yes, please.
Learning and creating trust with the staff and with the team. Trust is a little bit of an interesting one where everyone feels trust differently. Some people really believe that trust has to be earned. Some people are much more comfortable giving that trust. There's a lot of things that factor into it. And once you break trust, that's a whole nother world. So I do use DISC, and predictive index has a lot of ways of looking at how different styles of people maybe will build that trust. Some people need to have that really strong consistency to see trust. The more that you do something, say what you're going to do, the more likely they are to trust you. Some people have trust very quickly, and they build trust from a personal, professional level. And the more you get to know them, the stronger that trust is. It really depends on the person and the team and where you need to build the trust, or if the trust has been broken. I don't know if I answered that exactly, but I want to make sure that we at least touched on it, because trust is important. There's an implied trust at some point. Oh, perfect, Jennifer. Thank you. Yeah, trust is definitely a challenge with that. But again, it's meeting someone where they're at on what they need in order to trust you, understanding what it looks like, and or what they're doing when they don't trust you, because that can be a whole nother series of behaviors and undesirable outcomes when you find trust has been broken. And sometimes you don't even know it, right? You could just be bopping along, doing your thing, have no idea that you broke trust with someone. A promise you made that you don't remember, that they're holding that grudge continuously. That thing you let slip at the company holiday party that is continuing to just bother someone because it's unresolved conflict oftentimes.
I want to circle back to what we were just talking about in terms of coaching. Jennifer, thanks for the question, and Megan for responding. When you were talking about individual versus group coaching and meeting people where they are and so forth, one of the things that kept running through my mind was data. Like, how do you know this, right? There's an assessment process that has to happen. You have to get information so that you do know where they are and know where to meet them, and whether they're going to be group or individual coaching sessions or whatever you're going to use from your quiver to help that individual or that team. So tell me a little bit about sort of the assessment and data collection process.
Every organization faces this a little bit differently. And they look at, where do we need? Some companies, I will say, just say, we have this issue and we need to have better problem solving skills. Like, great, let's talk about that. They just know intuitively, and they kind of feel it. Other organizations will do surveys across the company, and they'll collect the data that way and say, great, what do people think? What do managers think? Where are the different levels? What are the gaps that we need? Some specific skills identified. I've worked also with organizations on doing some really kind of thoughtful, we'll say 360s on specific skills, on understanding, identifying where those gaps are. There are some other tools. It all depends on what's happening at an individual level Where are they noticing that the individual is not meeting their potential, that is noticing some skill gaps, and we want to build the awareness and the program around that, as well as from a results level, right? You can start looking at what are the results that we're having and what is the impact, and start tracking that down into where some of those skill gaps or challenges are. And I say skills because leadership is a skill. It's a skill that we talked about earlier that you can develop, but identifying exactly where some of those gaps are is where it gets a little tricky.
Got it. One thought, an interesting thought came to mind when we were talking managers and leaders and so forth. I see in organizations and have seen, and I've been subject to it myself before I started Converge and when I was working in an HR shop in a larger organization, the focus on people as opposed to process. And what I mean by that is, we're having a problem and becomes a people problem, when, as Deming would tell us, it was 80% a process problem. What do you see? And just expound on that if you would.
If it is truly a process problem and it's not a people problem, then I will say then there is the ability for the people to solve, right? People are not afraid of raising their hand. They're not letting others know, hey, here's where I'm identifying a problem. They're being forthright with their solutions. They're collaboratively working on solving the problem. Is that pretty fair?
Yeah.
If
Yeah,
it was
yeah.
just that piece, most likely you're having a little bit of mix of both.
Yeah.
And now you've got the people problem where people don't have the culture where they feel comfortable saying anything, or the process has gotten so out of whack or out of sync that we're seeing there being an issue. I'll say a typical example would be when you have a salesperson and it hands off to the operations team. There can be a lot of process issues with that, right? What one person promised, how that gets delivered, who does what, how does that handoff work? But there's also oftentimes a people problem where some teams are frustrated. One team doesn't want to do what, doesn't want to mash with them or do all the steps in the process. And now you start to have a little bit of resentment. You have a little bit of push and pull within the organization, and now it turns into a people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I see this in new managers most often, where they look immediately to who's to blame, as opposed to, like, wait a minute, is something broken here that we need to measure, we need to fix, and we need to retrain people on. And so that is like one thing that I constantly see, and we do our best to try to get people to step back and step away from the people for a moment before, going down the road of discipline and counseling and all of that, and look at really the process. And I think if a manager learns that skill or that understanding and is able to leverage that early on, boy, oh boy, that really goes a long way, I think. What are your thoughts on that?
I love that example and kind of that thought process of how do you take that step back? How do you understand the whole picture rather than just starting to have a loaded gun that you're going to point at it?
Right.
It's problem solving in a very holistic way, right? You're not just looking at, here's one piece of the pie, here's the problem, here's how I'm going to solve it, or here's the person. It's getting curious with it. It's looking at it from some different angles. It's not necessarily just keeping someone accountable or holding them responsible to something. Right. It's looking at everything else that flows with it. And that's
Sure.
a beautiful look at it. I've actually seen the opposite happen as well. I had a team of executives I was working with, and every people issue we identified, they wanted to put a process around it. And so their one-on-one process, they're like, okay, well, here's the one-on-one process, and here's all the things that we're going to check in with them. I was like, you cannot have a checkbox for every single piece that goes in with people. You can't. You have to be able to ask these questions. You have to have a different mindset around. You have to be flexible and meeting them where they're at. And so it was really hard to pull them out of, well, Megan, what questions do you think we should ask on our one-on-ones? So I'm like, well,
Right.
that depends on where their challenges are.
Sure.
or, oh, well, now here's this they truly wanted to create a process, which is right intention, but definitely overcompensating in
Little
one way.
tough on the execution.
I love that.
Yeah. So in a couple of moments that we have left, I want to try to tie this back to business and business performance, right? Because that's at the end of the day what it's all about, right? We need to be intentional. We've talked about that. We have to be careful about our excellent performers and taking them out of roles that maybe they're good at and they're happy at, and then putting them in a management role. We talked about some leadership skill gap deficiencies and assessments and how you understand where your leadership team stands and so forth. I want to tie that all with a big red bow and talk about, what do you see as the expert in where are organizations, what are the pain points that they are feeling because of these particular issues that we just discussed over the last 45 minutes? If you can do that.
I'm gonna do my best. How about that?
I'm sure you can do that.
I'm always doing my best on it. It shows up a little bit differently for every organization, but sometimes you'll see, oftentimes the best one is goals not getting met. Why are the goals not getting met? What's going on? Is it the goals are too big? Is it that people aren't aligned with it? Where is this friction with goals? However, that's going to show up for an organization that's going to look at a leadership opportunity, I'm going to say. Anytime there's conflict, unresolved conflict, that is definitely going to say a leadership opportunity for something, for organizations and teams. You'll see a lot of those retention issues or disengagement issues are huge red flags of leadership challenges that you're noticing. You'll see a lot of complaints, right? HR is seeing a lot of complaints. You're feeling a lot of complaints. A lot of times the CEO or owner or division leaders, managers, whatever you want to call them, they are frustrated, right? They're frustrated and they're pointing the finger at the team. Oftentimes they're pointing the finger at everyone else, and they are just overwhelmed, which is causing the disengagement. Burnout can often be an issue with leadership as well. Does that kind of help tie things up a little bit?
Yeah, no, that's perfect. I really, starting off the conversation sort of talking about contributors and working our way up, I wanted to make sure that we made clear for the audience what are some of the pains that they may be feeling, and if they are feeling them, then what's the root cause of those particular pains. And I think we nailed it there. Let's, if we could, just wrap up with sort of a closing statement, some thoughts that you have, maybe Megan, just to finalize this, and then make sure that we give everybody a takeaway and a call to action here with if they're experiencing these issues, if they want to talk through any of these, even if they're at the exploratory stages of this, how they get in touch with you and how to reach out and so forth. So if you would give us that to just wrap up, and then we can close up.
Absolutely. So I'll say some closing statements and kind of some of those key takeaways. One is always getting curious. If there's something that you can do to improve your leadership, I'm going to say get curious. Like Mark was saying with the problem solving, the more curious you are, the less accusatory you are, the less judgment you put on people, the more curious you are, the more you're going to get out of them, the better answers you're going to get, the more your team's going to be engaged with what you have to say. So those great questions that you can ask, and that's going to help you a great foundation for coaching your team as well and leaning into that leadership style. The second piece, and it goes hand in hand with the first, is listening. Great if you ask the questions, not great if you don't listen for the answers. And so many times, a lot of organizations will bring in, the consultants, and the consultants know best. And what do the consultants do? They go around and they ask the team all the questions, and then they package it back up. There's so much in there if you're willing to listen to them first. And that's where that means someone right there at. Once you get curious, you understand, once you're able to listen to it and truly have those key takeaways, you're able to then meet them and address whatever it is that's going on.
Great.
So those are my final statements on leadership and development. It's going to help if you how to lead your team. That's going to help if you want to lead improve your own leadership development skills as well.
So for those on the session today, who've joined the session today, or those who are going to listen to it at some point in the near future, and or experience any of this, or again are at the exploratory stages and want to learn more, how do they reach out and get in touch with you, Megan?
Yeah, so I do have my company Leader Experience, and happy to chat with you about the leadership needs. But honestly, I love collaborating with the Converge HR team. You guys are so fabulous at really supporting that human resources and having that pillar that really addresses it with both the organization's leader all the way through the team. And so I do always look at what's happening at an organizational level. And I do like to connect with the HR team. So if you don't have an HR team in place already, or you are looking for some of those additional resources, Converge HR is a great place to start. They'll make sure those processes are really aligned, and I'll be able to really help you and make sure that the people get along right there too.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you for your insights and for your participation today. Thank you for all the participants for your time. And like we said, please feel free to reach out to Megan or I, and we'd be glad to help. Have a great day, everyone. Thanks again.